back to George on Sports with myself, your host, George Egator. And today we have none other than Marcas Grant of NFL Fantasy. Welcome to the show.
Hey, appreciate you having me on.
I think one of the first things we need to do is touch on the crazy news. And I know you guys have, you've spoken about it numerous times, but Aaron Rodgers, right? I mean, before the season even started last year, there was so much drama in the offseason with him, not attending camp. And there seemed to be a storyline for every part of the season, all the way up until he's decided to now stay with the Green Bay Packers. But what was your immediate reaction to this move by Aaron?
I wasn't surprised that he stayed with Green Bay. I think as we kind of went through the process, it seemed more and more like that was kind of the only conclusion. It seemed like both sides were sort of patching things up. So that didn't surprise me. It surprised me that the length of the deal, the 4 years, and the $200 million, that's what surprised me. Now, I guess, obviously, to acquire Aaron Rodgers' services, that's apparently the going rate. But, talking to my friends who are Packers fans and just sort of kind of reading things, I know there's some concern about what this means for the rest of the team. You have tied up so much salary in your quarterback. And I'm not saying he doesn't deserve it. He hasn't earned it, but you've tied up so much money in him. I don't know how you build the rest of the team around him, right? You've got Devontae Adams coming back on the franchise tag, but there are pieces defensively that you're probably going to lose. You're going to lose some other wide receivers. I mean, Alan Lazard's probably gone. Marquez Valdez-Scantling is probably gone. So for all the joy and celebration of keeping Aaron Rodgers in town for the next 4 years, you do have some real serious questions about, can you build a competitive team around him, for the foreseeable future? Maybe it doesn't matter as much in the NFC because it seems like all the balance of power has moved to the AFC. So maybe this team can still very much compete and make a deep playoff run in the NFC. But I don't know that this is going to be conducive to the Packers building a championship level squad, which, honestly is the goal when you've had a guy so talented be there for so long. If he leaves with just one Super Bowl, I think it's going to be looked at as a major disappointment.
And I can't help but agree. I mean, of a guy of Packers, his talent, Aaron Rodgers' talent, and with a team like that. But you mentioned a few things that really interest me. So obviously they are going to have to let go of some pieces, because when you pay a man that kind of money, someone has to go, or more than one has to go. And you've mentioned some of the receivers. Raul Douglas, I believe, is probably going to go, the cornerback, and some other pieces too. So is it fair to say that, one, Aaron Rodgers is, he's kind of been a bit diva-ish in this whole process, and perhaps he was trying to up the price slightly. But two, is it boom or bust?
I think it is. I think at this point it is, right? I mean, they have been to the NFC Championship game a number of times, right? And they always seem to find a way to stub their toe. This year, they were the number 1 seed in the NFC, and they lose their first game at home to the 49ers. Yeah. At some point, it's not just about, hey, we can make the play. There are a lot of teams where it's like, hey, we just want to make the playoffs, right? Or we want to win a playoff game. The Packers are long past that. I do think if they don't win a Super Bowl in this next 4 years, because I think after this next 4 years, Rodgers he's going to retire, right? He'll be over 40 years old at that point. I can't imagine him hanging on too much longer. If they don't win a Super Bowl in the next 4 years, then I think this is truly a major failure for them.
And then flipping the script, obviously, we know Aaron Rodgers loves the limelight. He's been on the Pat McAfee show numerous times where people thought he was about to break the news and he didn't. But then it's announced that Russell Wilson basically stealing the limelight, which, to be fair, I'm quite happy about, because I was getting quite frustrated and bored with the whole Aaron Rodgers saga. I mean, you hear about it every second of the day. So in comes Russell Wilson, who makes a blockbuster move to the AFC West, which is now absolutely stacked. And I will include Derek Carr in that, because he is a good quarterback. Now, for me, what the Broncos gave away, it seems to me like they've taken a leaf out of the Rams playbook in terms of chucking in the kitchen sink and going everything for the veteran quarterback that is Russell Wilson. I mean, they've traded a few of their players, Noah Fant being one of them, and they've given away a first and second round pick both this year and next year. What's your view on that trade?
I think this is another one though, where you're right. The Broncos have gone all in on this, believing that the one missing piece was the quarterback, and I think there's some merit to that, right? Defensively, they're not a bad team. They have a lot of weapons around. I mean, I like their young wide receivers with Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton. I think they've opened up a spot now for a tight end. They've got a good young athletic tight end in Albert Okwuegbunam. But Drew Lock he wasn't the answer, right? I mean, there was a reason Teddy Bridgewater was getting starts for that team because they knew that Drew Lock wasn't going to be the guy. But at the same time, they have given up a lot of assets. I mean, they gave up a ton of draft picks. They gave up a good young player in Noah Fant. So they've given up a lot to Seattle on the hopes that Russell Wilson, all right, maybe he's not the same quarterback he was, 4 or 5 years ago, but that he is still good enough to get this team over the hump. And I think if the Broncos don't make a deep playoff run, I'm not sure they're in the same boat as the Packers where they have to win a Super Bowl, but they do have to show that they are built to make a playoff run and to at least contend for a Super Bowl. If that doesn't happen, if for whatever reason Russell Wilson athletically just falls off a cliff in the next few years and the Broncos are struggling, then, and I've heard people see this. I've seen people see this and say this and heard it. People are going to lose their jobs. There are a lot of people in that front office that are probably going to be held responsible for giving up that much, because if it doesn't work out, the Broncos are they've got their hands tied in terms of being able to build their roster over the next few years. So I don't think the stakes are quite as high as they are in Green Bay, but they do have to show that they can be competitive. Otherwise, it's going to be a real problem there.
And before we go on to our sleepers, fantasy sleepers, so the Seahawks, flipping it back to the Seahawks, it's clearly rebuild mode. I mean, we've just seen they've let go of Bobby Wagner. I think he's turning 32 or is 32, one of the members of the Legion of Boom who no longer exist. But Pete Carroll. So here's my thing. I thought that it was going to either be Russell Wilson, who now has gone, or Pete Carroll. Pete Carroll is pushing 72 now, I think. He's not a spring chicken. In my mind, surely you would want to walk away from the game. They say that as a head coach, you're only as good as your quarterback. And in this case, you were left with Geno Smith. Now you have Drew Lock. Are they looking to use one of those draft picks to potentially get someone like Malik in the draft? Or is it, I don't know where they go from here.
I really don't either. I mean, I know that's sort of been the thought process, right? That you go and you maybe try to get Malik Willis. Right now, the talk is that the Seahawks don't really love any of the quarterbacks in this year's draft. Now, let's take it with a grain of salt, right? I mean, last year, remember Kyle Shanahan let the whole world believe that they were going to draft Mac Jones, at number 3 overall, and instead they end up taking Trey Lance. So this could be the Seahawks just sort of throwing out a smokescreen to try and throw everybody off the trail. Or it could really be that they maybe go into this year and they let Drew Lock be the guy and they try again next year. I mean, there are some really good, talented quarterbacks that are potentially in the pipeline for next season's draft. Now, the question then becomes, are the Seahawks going to be too good to be in the running? I doubt that. I think they're sort of rebuilding this whole thing. I don't know. I think if I'm a Seahawks fan, I would feel better if maybe they made a play for Malik Willis or something just to have some kind of depth at the position. But it just right now sounds like, again, a day or two after this trade has happened, it sounds like they're willing to kind of give Locke the job, see what happens, and go forward from there. I think for folks in Seattle, it may be a rough year, especially when you consider the rest of the division, right? I mean, the Rams are the defending Super Bowl champs. The Cardinals, for much of the season, looked like they were on a path to a long playoff run. It didn't happen, but they looked that way. The 49ers were in the NFC Championship game. So right now, I think the Seahawks are a distant 4th in that division.
Yeah, it's going to be, it's been an interesting offseason anyway, as it is, but I think there's a lot more to come. But looking ahead, we're going to talk about some fantasy sleepers, something that I love to do. I'm an absolute fantasy junkie, and there's nothing better than lining up guys that you might want to target in your draft next season. So the first guy that I want to talk about, someone that I actually quite like, and that's Allen Robinson. So obviously he's now a free agent with the Bears, and he's had a horrid season. And before he actually did go over to the Bears, I really wanted him at the Colts, being a Colts fan. He's only 29, and I know, and this includes myself, watching him last season, I did think, has he had enough? Is he just not interested anymore? But really, there's a lot more than that. When you're underneath Matt Nagy's play calling, it's never really a good thing, and for obvious reasons. He didn't really have much of a relationship with Justin Fields, and not to mention the fact that they used multiple quarterbacks and Andy Dalton as well throughout the season. But I think last season was basically an outlier, because if you look at his previous stats from his previous seasons between 2015 and 2020, and that excludes his rookie season and the season where he tore his ACL, he averaged 154 targets, 90 catches, just under 1,200 yards and 8 touchdowns, and that's his per game average. And if you look at the quarterbacks that he's had, he hasn't actually had a decent quarterback. Blake Bortles, Andy Dalton, who you can argue sits in the mid-tier range, Trubisky, Fields, and Foles. So in my mind, what I'm hoping is that he gets traded to somewhere like the Colts, where we need a sort of big-bodied, go up and get it consistent receiver. And Allen Robinson is someone who can do that job. We've seen it in the previous years. Obviously, he left the Jags to go elsewhere. But for me, I think he's someone that people will probably look at, because I think this is going to be his second wind, if you like, in the league, and he's going to be the go-to guy wherever he goes next. And I think that will equate to fantasy points.
Yeah, I mean, I think pairing him with Michael Pittman in Indianapolis could be interesting. And I say this as somebody who loves Michael Pittman. I am an unabashed USC homer. Yep. So any guys from SC, any guys from SC, like I'm gonna be in their corner. But to pair the two of them up, I think would be great, because I think the Colts for a while they've kind of been looking for that second wide receiver, right? I mean, T.Y. Hilton is very much at the end of his career. I know he says he wants to play some more, but he's definitely a long way from his best days. And a lot of those other younger guys they have, whether it was Zach Pascal, some of those other guys have just not panned out. I think
Paris Campbell,
another one. Yeah.
Yeah.
The question remains, at least for now, is who's going to be the quarterback in Indianapolis. We're sort of waiting on the answer for that. But I think Robinson, certainly whoever it is, can be a help for them. I sort of like the idea though of A-Rob going back to Jacksonville where he started, because they've got, at least on paper, they've got their quarterback of the future there in Trevor Lawrence. They've got a new head coach now to try and get Trevor in the right direction. They've got some interesting wide receiver pieces. I mean, I like Laviska Shenault. We'll see what happens with DJ Chark if he comes back. Marvin Jones, a nice veteran presence there. But I think they need a true playmaker, and Robinson would give them that. But what I really want for Allen Robinson, I just want him to have a good quarterback for once. He's been in the league for a long time now, and we're sitting here debating whether or not Andy Dalton is the best quarterback he's ever played with. I just want him to go somewhere where he's going to have a quarterback that we know can get him the football consistently. That's all I ask for.
Yeah, I've watched him closely when he was at the Jags, and they came to London, and I actually went to watch him, and they, funnily enough, beat my Colts after waiting for them to come over for so many years. And it's just one of those players who you just want to see do well, because he's a good guy, he's a good receiver. He's just never had the opportunity. Going back to Jags is interesting, because I've got another guy on this list who is of the same team, but I will come to him shortly. All right, so the next guy that I want to touch on is Isaiah McKenzie, wide receiver for the Buffalo Bills. Now, he's a kind of short, shifty slot receiver and returner, and he obviously came to life quite a bit in the season. He's obviously slated to reach free agency this month, and it is likely that there was talk of bringing him back. Obviously, they have Gabriel Davis, who broke out pretty much this season. You do have Diggs already. You have Knox on the tight end side, and then you've got Singletary in the backfield. But he's a kind of shifty, quick guy. Over the last couple of years, he's only been on the field for over 50% of the snaps twice, and that's resulted in stat lines of 6, 65 and 2, 11, 125 and 1. Buffalo have a guy called Cole Beasley, who seemed, he's on the end. I would say he's towards the end of his career, and they could save just over $6 million by cutting him. So I think there is a space there for McKenzie to possibly take that role, because we've seen what he can do. He's very shifty. I almost want to link him to a kind of half of a Tyreek Hill. Obviously, Tyreek Hill was he's a very special guy, and nobody can really compare. But Isaiah McKenzie, seeing what he did, if he does come back to the team, or if he does get traded, I can see him being one of the sort of guys where it only takes a couple of plays and you're in a double-digit fantasy points.
I think you talk about the opportunity for him. the reports recently are that the Bills have allowed Cole Beasley permission to go out and seek a trade. I think Beasley sort of wants out, and it could be that the Bills are willing to kind of let him go. I mean, still has 1 year left on his contract, so why not try to trade him, see if you can get something back in return rather than just letting him walk. But either way, that would open up that slot opportunity for Isaiah McKenzie. And you talk about just adding speed, right? I mean, we know what Stephon Diggs can do. You mentioned Gabe Davis and his breakout at the end of the season. Now you put McKenzie in the slot, and that's just one more speedy weapon for Josh Allen to get the football to. I do think there's a chance for him to get a lot more opportunity to kind of have that breakout. And you talk about fantasy opportunities. I mean, the draft price will be maybe not quite free, but you're not going to be spending a lot of draft capital to get Isaiah McKenzie, right? You're going to be talking about the last few rounds of the draft. He'll still be hanging out there. So I think there's a real upper opportunity. I think there's real upside for him there, knowing how prolific the Bills offense has been the last couple of years. I do think he's going to be a guy that people are going to sort of maybe make a run at when you talk about getting in the double-digit rounds of drafts this year.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, I loved everything that I saw from him, and he's someone that I've made sure to put on my fantasy list for my draft this season. Another guy that I like the look of as well is Kenneth Gainwell, running back for the Eagles. So the thing is, he obviously is in a complementary role, or second in the depth chart, if you like. You obviously have Miles Sanders there as well, and Boston Scott obviously shows up every now and again. And he has shown promise this season. So a few stats: week 1, 43 yards at a touchdown; week 4, 89 yards at a touchdown; week 7, 61-1; week 13, 87-1; and week 18, again 87-1. He caught 33 passes, and he shows that he can be a playmaker at that next level. Although they do have obviously the likes of Hurts, who pretty much is a runner most of the time. With another year's experience under his belt, I think he should be a favorite, obviously, to back up Miles Sanders. And Sanders, we know, tends to get injured. I think he was injured for quite a lot of the season last year. And it's likely that obviously Kenneth Gainwell will get those reps. So it wouldn't be a shock to see him turning into a fantasy star. And I do think it would come to a point where if Sanders, almost like I'd liken it to CMC, who at the minute they're talking of potentially trading, because if as a running back, if you can't stay healthy, they kind of show you the door. And I kind of anticipate that with Miles Sanders, and it kind of leaves the door open for Kenneth Gainwell to be that guy.
I think it does. The thing about Miles Sanders, and I've been saying this the last couple of years, is that I know a lot of us, especially in fantasy, like Miles Sanders for his ability. It just seems like the Eagles don't like Miles Sanders as much as we do. And I think at some point we need to sort of take that hint. And I think that does open the door for Gainwell to step in and get some more opportunities. It's something about these Memphis running backs, man, the last few years. I mean, you got Kenneth Gainwell, you got Antonio Gibson. I mean, there's a handful of them in the last few years who've come out and been really productive in the NFL. And I think because he can do a lot of different things, I think that's certainly going to help him here. The only thing I would keep an eye on is, do the Eagles do something either in free agency or the draft? Maybe they do, maybe they don't. I don't know. But I do think Gainwell, again, another one of those guys that it's not going to take a ton of draft capital to add him. And understanding that he's not going to be an every week starter for you in fantasy, but when the matchup is right, and as you mentioned, if Miles Sanders misses time, he steps into a really large role there in Philadelphia. So I liked him at the end of last year. I thought he produced pretty well in certain opportunities, and I think that's going to continue. I think what he showed last year kind of proved to the coaching staff that he is ready and worthy of a little bit bigger role in Philly this year.
Tell you what, whatever the Eagles do with their first round pick will be very frustrating to see, given that, it's off the back of the Carson Wentz deal, which just going off the side slightly, this is 5 quarterbacks in the 5 seasons now, 5 different quarterbacks for us Colts, and it's just not good enough. It really isn't. So another guy who I absolutely love, and I kept on my bench the whole season, although he didn't really do much aside from one game against the Cowboys where he put up 189 yards. Can you see where I'm going with this, or who I might be? Do you reckon who you know who I'm going?
Against the Cowboys late in the season.
Yeah,
I don't know.
10 passes for 189 yards. Plays for the Giants.
Oh, Kadarius Toney.
Yeah. So that game, I mean, I heard a lot about Kadarius Toney, and this is when there was a lot of talk about the Giants receivers. Golladay, who signed, I believe, a $72 million contract and did absolutely nothing. Guaranteed, he didn't have much of a quarterback, but you obviously have Evan Ingram in the tight end. Shepard, who I don't know if I've read correctly that he's also on the trade block. I'm not entirely sure, but Kadarius Toney was a name that came up because there was an opportunity. We always talk about opportunity and what you do with the opportunity. And in that particular game, I went in and was able to grab Toney because he wasn't on anybody's radar, and that was his breakout game. Sadly for him, injuries bugged his entire season. If it wasn't one, it was the other. But I mean, when you see flash like that, it only goes to show what he can do. And I think if he's able to stay healthy, again, I want to liken him to the likes of Tyreek Hill, extremely shifty, quick, twitch muscle fibers, and he can get it done in tight spaces too, and he has the speed. If they can find a way, I mean, Brian Dabble is going to want to get him involved. Coming from a team like the Buffalo Bills, you need to utilize your weapons, especially when you're going, no offense to Giants fans, but they haven't got much going. And he is one of their bright stars on the team. So Kadarius Toney is another guy that I absolutely love. How do you feel about him?
No, I think he's a guy. So I remember last year when he was drafted, when in the NFL draft, people were sort of wondering why the Giants made the pick. At least at the time they did. It seemed like a reach. But when you saw him on the field, you got a glimpse of why they drafted him where they did. Because as you mentioned, I mean, you just get the ball in his hands and let him be athletic. He's going to make plays for you. He can make guys miss. He's got good speed. I think at times he was his own worst enemy last year. Definitely not being able to stay healthy didn't help. But Brian Daboll is there. I mean, if you like what he's done with the Bills, you got to believe he can do something with this Giants offense to get it turned around in the right direction. Hopefully Toney can stay healthy, because there's plenty of chances for him to get the ball there. I have no idea what's going to happen with, say, a guy like Sterling Shepard. You got to believe Kenny Golladay. You hope he can be more productive this year, because it's hard for him to be less productive, right?
He has got to be. It's unbelievable.
I mean, I had the same number of touchdowns as Kenny Golladay this past year, so
Yeah.
it's hard. It's hard to think he can be any worse, but I do think Tony's going to be a big part of it, where they just want to get him the ball, get him in space, and let him be productive. So he's another one that I think, people are going to, I think there's going to be some buzz over Toney, right? Like he's not going to necessarily hang around to the end of drafts, because I think people are going to be excited about what he can do. I think people are going to be excited about the coaching change in New York and hoping that turns into something. But I think, if you're drafting him, say, as a third or fourth wide receiver, I think, if he can stay healthy, maybe he moves his way up and even becomes maybe a low end wide receiver too. That might be his ceiling this year, but that's not bad considering where I think you're going to be drafting him this year.
Yeah. A couple of other guys that I like. So everybody saw D'Ernest Johnson, running back for the Cleveland Browns. And when he was called upon, and the multiple times that he was called upon, he did the job. This game, one game in particular, over the Bengals in week 18, rushed for 25 times, 123 yards and a touchdown, and 21-16 win. And I think that night was a night that a lot of people realized that we have something here. But bearing in mind, the Browns already have Chubb and Hunt. I mean, you have the 1-2 combo who are one of the better 1-2 running backs in the league. But then you throw in D'Ernest Johnson, who is a restricted free agent. So other teams, I mean, if another team does offer for him, the Browns have a chance to keep him around. But he's someone that I feel like whenever he's had a chance, he has produced. And I think he's one of the better backup running backs in the league that I think would do well serving as an RB borderline 2 on another team as opposed to an RB3. Again, it just depends. In my opinion, I think it would do him good to be traded. I don't know what plans the Browns have. But D'Ernest Johnson is someone who I think, he has all phases of the game. He can catch passes out of the backfield. He's elusive. He has a skill and ability, and he has a speed too.
He does. I mean, he's got the whole package. I think he's just, as you sort of alluded to, he's kind of stuck in a situation where at the moment he's behind two really talented guys, and it's going to be hard for him to get a number of touches as long as Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt are healthy. If one of those guys goes down, as you mentioned, we saw what he was able to do. I think he's a guy that I know, if I have a dynasty team, maybe I'm holding on to him, hoping he gets some opportunity. Maybe the Browns do figure out if they want to move him and give him a chance to play, because I do think in a lot of other places he would get a shot to get some more touches. It's just going to be really, really hard in Cleveland. I think as long as it's sort of status quo, I think in seasonal leagues, he's just going to be kind of a waiver wire ad when and where he gets those chances. But it was kind of cool to see him when he got time, when he got to start, or when he got a lot of touches, to really take advantage of those opportunities. And now you just, for him, unfortunately, he's sort of playing the waiting game to see if an opportunity opens up in Cleveland. But as long as those other guys are healthy, it's going to be hard for him to get on the field.
On the topic of Cleveland, where are you at with Baker Mayfield? This debate is just, Yeah, I
I think
personally, I'm not sold.
I think he's fine. I think
Really?
I mean, he's fine. Like I say fine in the way of, so a friend of mine has coined a term, like he's oatmeal, right? Which, like, there's nothing wrong with oatmeal, right? It's a perfectly good breakfast. It's
Yeah.
healthy, it's filling, but like if you're going out to eat for breakfast with your friends, you're not going to sit and order a bowl of oatmeal. It's just not exciting, right? And that's sort of what Baker is. I think last year he was hurt for a good chunk of the year, so maybe it's not completely fair to use that as the full part of his evaluation. But I think we've sort of seen him close to his ceiling, and it's fine. I mean, he's maybe a slightly above average quarterback, but I don't think he's the guy. I don't think he's the guy for Cleveland. I don't think he's a guy who's going to lead you to a Super Bowl. He's not necessarily going to tank your season. He's what, better than Drew Lock probably. He's
Yeah,
maybe better than maybe better than Carson Wentz. I mean, but like,
yeah.
Okay, I mean, but see, I guess that's the point, right? That's the debate.
Yeah.
Is it like, all right, he's fine, he's not great, he's just fine.
Interesting. It's a very, I don't know, just I was listening to a pod earlier today, and again, Baker is the topic of debate. I mean, at the minute he's kind of forgotten about because of all the crazy news that's happening, and he's sitting in a corner somewhere. But yeah, I don't think he's a guy. There's something about Baker that just, when he came into the league and it was so many commercials here, commercials there. And I know he broke the playoff record and unlocked all the beer fridges in the city, and it was all great. But I just don't think he's a guy going forward. So you alluded to a number of Jags guys at the top of the show, and I want to come back to one of them in particular, and that is Laviska Shenault Jr. for the Jags. Mm-hmm. So he is someone that I find can be utilized in a number of different ways. I don't want to compare him to Debo because he isn't that, but he can play that kind of role. The only difference now is Urban Meyer is gone, so that's great, and that's great for everybody on that squad because Doug Peterson will absolutely he will correct that ship because that is his style. He'll get everything level, everything working. When you have a guy like Trevor Lawrence, who, okay, he didn't have a great season, still managed to beat us in the playoffs. I don't know how, but I think he will steady the ship in the sense that guys will be going in the right direction. And let's not forget their running back as well, who didn't even get to step foot on the field in Travis Etienne as well.
Etienne, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Only problem with this is, so you got DJ Chark, who's a free agent, and there was talk about him going to the Colts. I think the Raiders might even be looking at the Bears too, might be looking at him now. Marvin Jones Jr. is turning 32, so again, he may or may not be on his way out. And I think it's just a case of, you mentioned Allen Robinson. Now, I don't remember the last time a team went back to the team that they left originally. I'm not too sure who that would be, but it's not a bad shout. It really isn't. I mean, if Allen Robinson does go back and you have the likes of Robinson, Laviska, if DJ Chark goes or stays, it's not a bad shout. I just think Laviska Shenault, from what he showed, again, is very limited because they didn't have much going as a squad, as a whole franchise, which is sadly the story for the Jags. But I feel like this season, with Doug Peterson at the helm, and they're running back, and just a whole more balanced squad, I feel like he could be the guy that could really shine, and he could be the focal point of the offense as well as the running backs.
So I get sort of made fun of because I have been a stan for Laviska Shenault from the beginning, from the moment he was drafted. I remember watching him in college at Colorado and liking the fact that he was kind of a Swiss Army knife in college, and I thought he could be that in Jacksonville. I still think he can. They just so far haven't had the coach to sort of unlock that, and maybe Doug Peterson is that guy. So, I as a rookie, I was all about trying to draft him as a sleeper. Last year, I was trying to sort of make him a sleeper. I ran into a guy recently. I was lucky to be in Vegas for the Pro Bowl, and was just talking to some fans, and some guy saw me and he's like, I drafted Laviska Shenault because of you. And I had to kind of hang my head in shame and apologize a little bit. But so I will say that I don't think I'm ready to completely give up on Shenault yet. I think after the last couple of years, I will be a little bit quieter about my love for him, but I'm not going to give up on it altogether. Because I do think that there's a way to kind of get him going and make him productive in that offense. And maybe Doug Peterson is the guy. And look, maybe it is, like, if depending on what they put around him, right? If Chark is back, if they bring back Allen Robinson, if they go a different direction at the wide receiver position, maybe that means there's more chances for him to get the football in his hands. But like I said, I still love his skill set. I think the opportunity is there. We just need the scheme to sort of fit, and to for him to find a fit in that offensive scheme, whatever it's going to be. So I'm still on board. I just may not be waving the flag quite as vigorously as I have been before.
So before we come to the close of the show, is there anyone you want to mention out there for people who are watching and looking for some other fantasy sleepers?
So there's a couple guys in the AFC East, all running backs that I think could be interesting. Michael Carter, who I thought was doing some good things for the Jets last year. He got banged up a little bit, but I still think he's got an opportunity to be very productive. Devin Singletary, I think, is going to be interesting. That one, depends heavily on what the Bills do at running back, because I think they're at a point where they may be sort of tired of Zach Moss. I think that's not working out the way they wanted to. We saw Singletary late last year really start to kind of take over in that backfield, and I've always liked his talent. I always used to joke that it seemed like he needed 3 forms of ID to get into the end zone, because like he could get the ball, he just never scored touchdowns. But I think I think they're going to give him more opportunities. So if they don't make any large changes, they don't bring anybody in, I think Devin Singletary really has a nice opportunity. And the third one, just staying in the division, and this was not on purpose. It just happened that I found 3 guys that happened to be in the same division. But Ramondre Stevenson in New England. I think Damian Harris is a nice player, but I think you're starting to see them really like Stevenson more. I know in training camp last year, their running backs coach says he has a lot to work on, and I think that scared a lot of fantasy people. But he started to get better as the year went on, and the comparisons to LeGarrette Blount started to shine through a little bit.
Him.
So so if he keeps going on that track, I think Ramondre Stevenson is potentially in line for a decent year this year.
The Singletary one is really interesting because I had them a number of times in my fantasy season, and for the majority of the season, he didn't really do that much. But like you say, towards the end, he came on really strong. And in my mind, the perfect fit for the Buffalo Bills would be someone like Melvin Gordon. If it meant that you paired him with Singletary to, provide some pressure, then maybe. But it is interesting you say that, because he did have a good showing towards the end of the season. And I think, like you're saying now, that has swayed a lot of people. So that is an interesting fact.
Yeah, but I think the thing about Buffalo that to keep in mind is that for at least the last 3 or 4 years, Josh Allen has sort of been the de facto goal line back there. Like, he's the one when they get close who seems to run it. But I'm also just starting to wonder at some point, like, he's your franchise quarterback. How much do you want him taking those hits?
Exactly.
Like, it's been nice. I think he's had like 6 or more rushing touchdowns every year of his career. He's carrying the ball a lot. But at some point, if you're Buffalo, I think you may want him to ease off a little bit, because the last thing you want is to lose him for an extended period of time, knowing how important he is to your team.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all for Josh Allen running and taking a knee and sliding, but as for becoming the RB1 in some of the games that he was, it's mind baffling. He is your franchise guy. He is the guy, and potential Hall of Famer at this rate. So I think either they bring another guy in, or Singletary is the guy that the workhorse that they use long into the season. Okay, so Marcus, it's not every day that I get to speak to an NFL fantasy expert. So give me a summary of a day in the life of Marcas Grant.
Well, I'll give you the in-season summary, because the off-season is not nearly as exciting. Usually, it's like I get up, wake up in the morning, and I'm on dad duty, at least for the first part, getting the kid ready for to get him dressed, get him fed, get him out of the house. Usually, right. But then depending on the day, I'm usually prepping either for a podcast or I'm doing a podcast. I'm usually working on 2 shows at the same time. So I'm either prepping for a podcast or I'm recording a podcast. Once that's done, usually a production call for Fantasy Live usually hits kind of mid-morning, just before noon sometime. So then between the production call and getting ready for the show in the afternoon, it's just research, right? I'm sitting, I'm prepping whatever I'm going to talk about. I'm researching stats. I'm working with the research team to get stuff. I'm working with the producers, to let them know what I want to talk about, and, so they can get video to show on screen while I'm doing that. And then, the show hits, we do the live show in the afternoons on NFL Network. At that point, I go home, I go back to dad duty. And then usually after the kid goes to bed, maybe a little bit more research for the next day.
I just thought I'd get one in there because one, being from the UK, obviously we have a load of fans over here, and you've seen the news about the international games coming over. But two, obviously listening to the show is great, but I don't think people really understand what goes into the show. Like all the background you mentioned, obviously you're passing things to your production team so they can line things up for you. So I just think it's always good to have an insight into how these things work. But Marcus, has been an absolute pleasure. Thank you once again for joining us, and I hope people found this episode interesting. For the guys out there, if you haven't already subscribed to their podcast, the NFL Fantasy Show, on whichever platform you listen to, or your podcast with Michael Grant, Marcas Grant and Michael Florio, definitely have a listen. You won't regret it, especially if you're a fantasy head. And absolutely stay tuned. Marcus, once again, thank you so much. Hopefully we'll be able to catch up soon when all the news has calmed down a little bit.
Yeah, that won't be soon, but yeah, I appreciate the invitation. I had a great time, and I'll love to talk to you again.
Thank you very much for appearing on the show. And guys, stay tuned. We've got loads of episodes coming soon.